everybody. Welcome to
The Pastor Starter Podcast
with Ayla Chavez,
and Dr. Monet.
episode 1.
No longer hidden.
Hidden. So this podcast has been in the making for a very long time. I think we first talked about it, was it before COVID?
Yep.
Okay, so before COVID, we talked about starting a podcast years ago. I feel like the early 2000s are whatever is considered early 2000s, maybe 2009 to 2012-ish.
Yeah.
You talked about a Preacher's Kid Coalition where we could be having an alliance for preacher's kids and the struggles they go through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so during that time, we never really took off with the Preacher's Kid Alliance, but that's when we started talking about doing a podcast.
Yep.
So here we are with
Can you
the
believe
podcast.
it?
Yeah, I can't believe we on camera in front of people talking about our business. It makes me a little nervous.
Right?
Yeah.
But
because
hey,
if it was up to me, I would keep all of my life a secret. Like I would just live very privately, no social media, off the grid, and just live in a happy bubble. What about you?
same. I've been in a bubble for a long time. I guess, we're no longer hidden, so here we are.
Right. You've definitely been in more of a bubble than I have. Yeah. So here we are. We doing it. Obedience. That's the whole thing. All right. So why are we entitling this No Longer Hidden? Because you're the one who came up with the title. You text me and said our first episode should be No Longer Hidden.
Yeah, I feel like the season that we're in, we've had numerous conversations on God separating the wheat from the tare. And at this point, because of our journey, because of our obedience, God is now pushing us to the forefront. So
I
I
agree.
feel like, yeah, at this point, we can't remain hidden anymore. So it's our time to, take our place in the kingdom. Yeah.
With these bad seeds that are coming up, this tear. And the farmer says, let it all grow together. And then at harvest, we'll throw the tear away and have it burned and we'll have the wheat. Because if you pluck it at the same time, then it'll kill some of the wheat. Mm-hmm. So, and you talking about the unhidden thing, it's one of those things where all of the processing is done in hiding. Because I know some people are probably shocked that we have a podcast. More so you than me, because of you being way more quiet than I am. Right. And for that reason, people assume with people like you can't be ready for whatever God has for you, or they question the calling that God has on your life because they haven't been around to see the processing. But all things happen behind the scenes. Like God is going to take you through a journey, through a process before he calls you to the forefront. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is purging the old stuff out of you and getting rid of all of those things that are not like God before you have a platform.
Right. And everybody's platform is different. Very true. So just because God has called you doesn't necessarily mean that you got to stand behind the pulpit.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. So with this being the pastor's daughter, let's talk about our journey as being PKs. So PKs is the acronym for pastor's kid. We decided on pastor's daughter because that is our commonality. We are both pastor's children. But one of the things we talked about is how we're no longer kids. So a lot of those stigmas that comes with being a pastor's kid, we don't really have to answer to that stuff anymore because we grown now. But it really shaped who we are in a lot of ways. And the way we handle things. And I know one of the things you said you want to talk about possibly on this episode, but also a future episode is, are you necessarily obligated to be in ministry or operate in ministry just because your parents are in ministry?
Right.
So what was your journey like? Like, when did your dad become a pastor?
He became a pastor when I was 9.
Okay.
So yeah, of course, grew up in church. My dad was a deacon first under my great uncle. So I come from a line of pastors in my family.
Okay.
So my grandfather, two of his brothers are pastors, and then my dad and his brother, one of his brothers, are pastors. So, been raised in church all of my life. My dad became a pastor when I was 9. So even within that transition, that process was kind of difficult because raised in the church, family church, being with everyone, and then to feel like you're removed from your comfort zone
To
to something,
go to the
yeah,
another church where your dad was pastoring.
yeah,
Gotcha.
something new. So like we were heavily involved. It was a smaller church. My dad not only preached on Sundays, he was the musician. My brother and I, my cousins, we were the choir.
I
My
know your
mom,
dad was a musician.
well, so he was minister of music at my great uncle's church.
Your
So
dad plays an instrument?
yeah, piano.
Really? I
Yeah,
never knew that.
he was minister of
Okay.
music. So not only once, this the call came
Right.
for him to go into, pastoralship. Not only did he have to preach, but he had to be the musician. So he wore many hats. So we
Right.
like were right there in the paint with him. So we were the choir, me, my brother, my cousins, a few other of the youth within the church. My mom taught Sunday school. So like we were all in.
Right.
So from there, for him to have to build that ministry, a small church, and then we were there about 2 years. So my dad and my grandfather baptized me. So I got
Okay.
baptized there in that church. Then we left there and we were under my uncle's ministry for a while before my dad was called to be
The pastor.
pastor at Greater Union where he is now. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. So was there like a conversation? Did y'all have a meeting? Because I know when my dad became a pastor, we had a family meeting.
Yeah, but my brother was younger, so he was like 4.
Okay.
So yeah, I distinctly remember us, him sitting down saying, okay, we're no longer going to be at, the one church. We're going to be moving to a new church. God has called me into ministry. So before he became pastor, we left my grandparents' church. We went to my dad's home church where he was brought up and raised at. So we were under that ministry for a while, him being mentored into the ministry and all of that before he even, got his own church. So
Okay.
just the transitions within that, of course, it comes, being young,
Right.
trying to handle all of that. It was a process. And of course, having to adjust and adapt. I think it's something that all PKs, learn to have to do, being
Yeah.
adaptable and all of that. So
So did you feel like I don't want my dad to be a pastor, or I do, or do you feel like you were too young to even really have a thought process of what comes along with that? Were you
I
just
think
like on board?
I think I was too young to really process.
Okay.
At that point, we were already church kids anyways, always in church. So just okay, this is a different title, a new role, a new position,
Right.
that he's, taking on. But I don't think I really understood the magnitude of it until I got to about middle school.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then the stigma of, oh, the PKs, they the worst ones.
So that's when you started hearing the stigma in middle school.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I do want to know, with the whole stigma of preachers' kids being the worst ones, I want to know your background on that. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about how my dad became a pastor and my thoughts on that. And then we'll kind of talk about the stigmas that go along
Yeah.
with it. So
Okay.
for me, my dad was a deacon first, same. I feel like that happens to a lot of preachers, especially I want to say the old school preachers.
Yeah.
Now, now I feel
Okay.
like, especially these preachers and pastors in our age group, I'm gonna just be honest, because that's what this podcast is, right?
Uh-huh.
And one thing I will warn y'all about, my opinions may be a little unpopular and a little rough around the edges, but this is our podcast, so we're gonna say what we want on our podcast, okay?
Mhm.
So in my opinion, preachers and pastors now, they not putting a lot of work in. And like we talked about that whole hidden thing, it
Mhm.
seems, I ain't saying I got all the answers, but it seems like a lot of people just popping up and being a preacher or a pastor, and there's no process to get there. And I think I said that to say, I think a lot of older pastors we know were deacons first. They were trained in the church before they even got in the pulpit and started preaching, and before they became pastors. I've seen a lot of people, they just become pastors. That's it. Like, that's step one. So my dad was a deacon first. Same. I feel like maybe he was a deacon when I was born, but I could be wrong. It probably happened while I was younger, a toddler. I don't remember. You know what? I do remember my dad being ordained to be a deacon. I don't remember the age, but I think I do remember that. So at some point, my dad was a deacon. If I'm not mistaken, he became a preacher when I was around 7. And I think that's when my brother was born. So I think that, but I know for a fact he became a pastor when I was 11. And so I grew up in one church. We grew up Free Will Baptist, in that denomination. And I absolutely loved my church growing up. I loved my pastor. He has since passed away. And it was just very much a family atmosphere. Like, my dad was a trustee, so he'd go in the back and count the money. We would have to stay at the church. Now, there's one thing I did not like growing up, that whole staying at the church for hours. Well, once I got older, I didn't. When I was younger, it was fun because you running around with the church kids, you waiting until your dad's counting the money, because there was another family that we were really close with. They had a few children and their dad was a deacon as well. So we would wait around with them, and then we would all go out to eat. And that was like our Sunday thing. I remember growing up, and we always had communion service at 5 p.m. And a lot of people don't do that anymore. Like, you just take communion during church. We used to have to go back to church for communion and go
Once I
back
went to
to church.
college, yeah,
Right.
I went to
And
community
go
service.
back to church for the feet washing ceremony. Like, it was a whole thing where we would take off our shoes, they would wash our feet. It was a whole communion ceremony thing. And we had children's church. Like, my church was fun, vacation Bible school, all those things. And it was in D-Land, and a lot of people went. I feel like it was a pretty, not a huge church, but a kind of big congregation. Like, I remember going to Sunday school conventions for Free Will and choir and the mass choir and all those, things that people were doing in the 90s. But tragically, our pastor died of a heart attack during one of the church conventions. And after that, that caused like a split in the church of who would be the pastor, who would get the church. And my parents decided to leave the church that we grew up in. And I remember feeling torn, like it hurt to have our pastor die that we loved so much and leave that congregation, leave our friends, and just the split of that. And I remember my parents being very hurt about it also. So after that happened, we actually went to your uncle church for a while. I remember my dad saying that we needed to be under something called watch care, where we did not necessarily permanently join the church, but we needed somebody to be able to be like a shepherd over us. Because my parents have always been adamant, like, we need to be in a church. You need to be affiliated with a church organization. So we went to your uncle's church for a little bit, but in my mind, I don't believe it was that long. I think it was less than a year. I don't remember it being that long. I don't remember being there every Sunday, but again, I was 11, so my memory a little spotty on that. But I remember, and at that time, my dad was a preacher, like I said. My aunt in Osteen, they were having Family and Friends Day, I believe, or some type of event at church. And she called my dad and she was like, hey, will you come and preach? We don't have a pastor, but can you preach for this service? So we go out to Osteen. Girl, it was a dirt road. It was very reminiscent of Color Purple, like dirt road, nothing out there. It's 30 minutes from D-Land. We drive to Osteen, and after my dad preached, the congregation was like, we need a pastor. Pretty much, we want you to be the pastor. I think they had like a church voting or something. And then we had a family meeting, because my mom has always been like the Cosby Show. We always had to have a meeting about something. So we had this family meeting, and I remember my dad saying, like, I'm going to Osteen. God has called me to pastor, and I protested. I was like, I don't want to be out there. My mama ain't want to go. I was like, they country. I don't want to go at all. Like, no parts of me wanted to do it. And what's interesting that I want to mention, back when we were at my old church before my pastor died, our congregation really loved on our pastor, like pastor appreciation. He would get gifts. They really showed me what it means to honor a pastor. I remember those early memories. I remember sitting in church, girl, and I said, God, please make my daddy a pastor so we can get gifts. I prayed that. And I completely forgot about that prayer, I think, until my dad had his 20th pastoral anniversary, because we're going on 25 years now, or my dad is going on 25 years now. And I remember that prayer, and I'm like, not knowing everything that comes with being a pastor or any of that, I just remember they gave the old pastor a money tree. And I was like, I want us to have some gifts. And not saying that God honored my prayer, but I think it's interesting that God had all of that in the works to begin with. And it could have been, because we'll talk about the gifts that God has given us.
Right.
It could have been a part of that gifting, like a knowing that God put inside of me. And I'm speaking something and didn't even realize what I was speaking, because now in my adult life, I realize I say a lot of things and don't even realize what I'm saying. And then it comes to pass and I'm like, I was just talking. I didn't mean that.
Power
So
of the tongue.
yeah, definitely the power of the tongue. So that was my story on my dad becoming pastor and kind of how that looked. I don't recall the stigma of being a pastor kid or hearing that the pastor kids are the worst ones until ninth grade. So ninth grade, how old are you? Like 14?
Yeah.
Was I
Yeah,
14?
14.
So at 11, I was what, in sixth grade?
Mhm.
Okay, so yeah, 14 is when I remember hearing about preachers' kids. So you said you heard pastor kids are the worst ones, and then what did you think of hearing that?
Um, I've always been a perfectionist, so we can talk about the whole perfectionism and all of that too. And I think that kind
Were
of
you a
amped it up.
perfectionist before that?
Yeah,
Is that like your natural personality?
yeah.
Okay.
So to hear that is like, oh no, I gotta beat this stereotype. I gotta prove
Right.
everybody wrong. Like that's not the case. Because I'm like, yeah, they're bad, they're rebellious, they're this and that, they don't listen. And I'm like, well, who have y'all seen, prior to who made the blueprint for this for y'all to think
Right.
like, you know. So in my mind, I was determined to prove everybody wrong.
And beat that
That-
stigma of the worst ones.
yep.
Do you feel like that put a lot of pressure on you though,
I think I put more pressure on myself
than what people were putting
than
on you?
what people, yep.
One of the things you said about the pastor's kids being the worst ones, what was I gonna say? Um, do you think that stigma is true, or do you think it's more related to people pay more attention to pastors' kids, or they have a higher expectation? So when pastors' kids behave just like everybody else,
Yep.
now they're seemingly or
Yeah.
worse, but it's like we doing nothing no different than somebody else
Right.
would at this age.
Yeah. We're put under a microscope. So like there's a hyper fixation or focus on us. And because we have to be, at the forefront of the church because we're the first family. So all eyes are on us. So I think looking back now, I was like, yeah, we no different than any other kid, going through the phases of life. But yeah, so that makes a good point. And I think because of the pressure that's put on us, a lot of, well, I can't speak for everyone, but some pastors' kids rebel or they leave the church.
Yeah, that's something that will definitely be discussed in a later
Yeah.
podcast, because our generation of, they keep switching our generation names, millennials, this, that. I don't know where I fall. But anyway, I guess we millennials.
Yeah.
But a lot of millennials are leaving the church or have left the church. But the good thing is a lot have come back and they've gotten away from religion and the rules of it, and relationship is growing. But that's another topic for another day. But with the stereotype you said of pastors' kids being under a microscope. I remember I was in high school, and this had to be like 11th or 12th grade because I was driving all the time. And this was back when I was a Lil Wayne fan. Like, I was listening to the Carter album, and I'm driving down Clara, Indy Land. I got the windows down. I'm driving, I'm rapping, like I'm out here. Somebody called my mama and was like, your daughter's speeding down Clara listening to loud rap music. I always felt like I couldn't go to the bathroom without somebody telling my parents. And I don't I know the saying the pastor's kids are the worst ones, but I don't remember people did say it to me, but for whatever reason, it did not make me a perfectionist. It made me rebellious. And I feel like that's one of the reasons when I was thinking of doing a podcast, even before you and I had talked about it, I was looking for like a podcast host and what do I want to talk about in a podcast? Like, I just always knew with my background being theater arts and communications that this is something I wanted to do. But when we started talking about it, and then it came back to me this year, 2024, and I think we talked about it at the beginning of the year, beginning of 2024, or some months back. And I texted you and I was like, hey, you ready to do this podcast? Let's do July, because that's our birthdays, perfect timing, that kind of thing. I was like, Monet is the perfect person to have in the podcast with me because our views are very different on the way that we navigated through the pastor's kid scene. We have similar backgrounds, but the way we handled it is very different. I had a boy that I really liked, and y'all will see most of my stories revolve around me liking a boy, unfortunately. But I had a boy that I really liked when I was in 9th grade. And he was kind of like, I don't want to date you. Like, I don't like you because your daddy a pastor. Like, you ain't gonna be able to do this, you ain't gonna be able to do that. And in my mind, and this is just, a part of being no longer hidden is being honest and transparent, right? And it makes me cringe because I don't like putting my business out there. But in my mind, I was like, no, I'm gonna show you. Like, I can hang with the best of them. I want you to like me. Like, why you don't want to like me? Because my daddy a pastor. So I became rebellious, very rebellious. And I think I did not like the fact that people had this expectation of me to be perfect, or this expectation of me to be in ministry just because my dad was in ministry. Because I remember thinking, and it took me to mature in age and mature in Christ, because I used to feel like just because my daddy got an anointing don't mean that I gotta have an anointing. Like, why, I could do and be whoever I want to be. And there's a part of me that agrees that because your parents are called does not mean that you are called. Right. But I do feel like there is, and this is my example, no way am I saying that the first family or pastor's kids are above anybody else. But if we think about hierarchy, when we think about people in England, you have the king, the prince, the queen, the princess, whatever. I do think that there's a sense of kingdomship in the first family. And I do think that some of that anointing that God gives does trickle down to the children. There's a certain kind of covering or a certain kind of protection that comes with that. Because the enemy is going to attack the pastor. So he's going to attack the pastor's wife. He's going to attack the pastor's children. And I think that there's a lot of times a calling that goes with that. There is certain kingdom responsibility. And I know for me, I always felt that I was different from everybody else, but I was determined to fit in, even when I didn't fit in. And I don't know if I'm necessarily a perfectionist. I don't think I am. My personality is kind of like easy breezy, I'm just kind of floating through, but it was always with the assumption of whatever I want is gonna come to me kind of thing. Like, I never felt like I needed to work hard for an A because I always had the assumption that I'm gonna get an A. That was my thing. And I think your personality is, let me work hard, let me study, let me stay up all night to make sure I get this.
No, well, things came easy for me. So yeah.
Okay, so we do have that similarity because
Right.
things came easy for me. So
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I needed to be a perfectionist because it's gonna happen anyway.
Mhm.
Even in my most rebellious nature, I never had, and we talked about this before off camera, and our time is ending. But one of the things I want to say is, remember you told me when we were kind of talking about the purity culture, you were like, you had this fear. I don't know if it was a fear of God or was it a fear of hell that you had?
Well, because we had to watch a video and
Okay.
like it was drilled in us, and I was like, oh, definitely not. Like I'm not going to hell. I got to do
Okay,
right.
so it was the
I'm gonna live
video
right.
that
Yes.
incited the fear of possibly
Yeah.
going to hell.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was like
And then,
drilled into us.
right. And then for me, of course, I grew up knowing hell is real. We got heaven, we got hell, that kind of thing. But in my most rebellious, wilding out stage, I just always knew this is not my final destination. Like, yeah, I'm about to have fun, I'm about to cut up, but I know this ain't all that's for me. So I already know for a fact I'm not going to hell because I'm God's child. I'm gonna get it together. And I don't know if that's the best way to think because tomorrow is not promised. But in my naivety,
Yeah.
there was this confidence I had in God that I was going to be all right. But
Yeah.
there was also a lot of naivety attached to it because we should not play our life so close on the edge when it
Right.
comes to that.
Yeah.
So those are some of our similarities and some of our differences. And I just want y'all to come on this journey with us. We're going to be talking about a lot of topics. And it's not just for preachers' kids, it's for anybody.
Right.
But the main thing is that Dr. Monet and I, our heart is the importance of choosing Jesus over culture.
That's it.
Yeah. I think for so long, and I can only speak with me, I chose a lot of culture and a little bit of Jesus because we grew up in the church. We love God, but there comes a time where you have to draw a line in the sand, and it's like, what are you going to choose? And whatever you feed is what is going to grow the most. So just being at this place of being no longer hidden and choosing whatever path it is that God has for us, even when it goes against our desires.
Right. Right. Can't be lukewarm, especially in this day and age. You got to choose whose side you're going to be on.
Yep, very true. And lukewarm seems to be the thing. I don't even think people realize that they're being lukewarm though.
Mm.
Yeah, what you think?
Yeah. It's like, or they teeter-totter on over that
Yeah,
line.
but in their mind, they're not teeter-tottering.
Mm.
Because I've been having a few people lately tell me I'm doing too much. Like, you ain't got to do all that for God. And I'm like, this is the bare minimum. Like,
Right.
it's a lot of people not doing enough. But
Yeah.
because it's been so accepted by culture, it
Mhm.
is okay to be lukewarm. We look at celebrities all the time and they get up on these award shows and they like, first I want to thank God.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you just had a whole video where nothing you did represented Christ, nothing. So it is accepted to straddle that fence, to party, hookah, drink, all this, all Saturday night, post all the pictures doing it. And then Sunday I go to church and I post my Bible scripture. And that's the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And no judgment at all, because I've been there,
Mhm.
but now it's you have to make a choice and draw that line in the sand. So choosing Jesus.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's it for episode 1. We hope you join us on our journey. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. What's our pastor's daughter?
The pastor's daughter. Yeah.
Pastor's daughter on YouTube.
Yeah.
So we have really enjoyed our time with you. And
Yeah.
we will see y'all on episode 2.
Stay tuned.
Have a great one.